The air at Southampton Harbor on a late November evening does not simply rest. It hangs. It is a freezing, maritime suspension. A thick fog composed in equal measure of North Atlantic brine, the faint metallic tang of pulverized coal, and the biting chill of the English winter. You are standing on the edge of Pier 90, and the world around you feels deliberately obscured. The twilight has systematically stripped the color from the docks, leaving behind only a monochromatic canvas of gray mist and the pale, struggling halos of wrought iron gas lamps. The moisture settles on the heavy wool of your overcoat with a quiet, icy persistence. It is a wet, structural cold that seems to seep up from the slick cobblestones beneath your leather boots. A climate that actively discourages lingering and presents a profound, atmospheric argument for finding immediate shelter. And yet, you pause, because rising from the black, restless water of the harbor, blocking out the faint glow of the city lights entirely, is a sheer cliff of manufactured steel. It is the RMS Aquitania. In the Polite Society papers of 1924, she is known affectionately as the Ship Beautiful. But standing here at the base of her hull, beauty is entirely secondary to her immense, undeniable scale. She is a floating fortress, a vertical horizon of black enamel that stretches over 900 feet into the freezing fog. Her 4 massive funnels are lost in the mist high above, but you can feel their presence. You can sense the dormant, industrial leviathan waiting in the icy water. Take a long moment to consider the sheer physical mass of this machine. 45,000 tons of British steel, brass, mahogany, and glass, resting with patient, heavy indifference against the pilings of the pier. The hull plates are thick and unyielding, bound together by millions of iron rivets. Each of those rivets was driven by hand, hammered into submission by men who understood that the North Atlantic does not forgive a loose seam or a moment of structural hesitation. They hold the line against the total, crushing pressure of the deep ocean. It is a masterpiece of mechanical defiance. The riveting process itself is a marvel of industrial endurance, a symphony of heated metal and sheer human will. To construct a hull of this magnitude, thousands of steel plates, some weighing up to 3 tons, had to be perfectly aligned. The rivets, heated to a glowing, incandescent cherry red, were passed by tongs and driven into the overlapping steel, cooling and contracting to pull the plates together with an impossible, watertight tension. It is this tension that holds the ocean at bay, a quiet, permanent, mechanical grip. High above, cutting through the dense maritime fog, are rows of perfectly round portholes. They glow with a soft, diffused amber light, offering a warm, distant promise of the sanctuary within. The contrast is absolute. Out here, there is the freezing brine, the smell of ash, and the harsh, abrasive reality of the docks. You can hear the distant, groaning iron of the cargo cranes, the hiss of escaping steam, and the muted, rhythmic slapping of the harbor water against the concrete pylons. But up there, suspended behind an inch of riveted steel and thick glass, is an engineered climate of complete, unwavering composure. You take a slow, deep breath of the freezing air, feeling the cold seep through your leather gloves, a sharp reminder of the unforgiving void waiting just beyond the harbor, before you finally begin to walk forward. A long, steeply angled wooden gangway bridges the gap between the concrete pier and the open doorway in the side of the black steel hull. as you step onto the sloped boards, you feel the slightest, almost imperceptible shift beneath your weight. The thick wooden planks groan softly, a hollow, rhythmic sound that marks the physical transition between the solid reliability of the earth and the uncertain reality of the floating world. The gangway is enclosed by heavy canvas walls, keeping the worst of the biting wind at bay. But the draft still snaps at the fabric with a sudden, abrasive harbor gust. As you slowly ascend the incline, the chaotic noises of the dock begin to fall away, replaced entirely by the steady, methodical thud of your own footsteps on the wet wood. The wood beneath your feet is deeply scarred from thousands of previous crossings, bearing the faint indentations of heavy leather trunks and the purposeful strides of long-forgotten passengers. It is a temporary bridge, suspended over the black, freezing water, a fragile link between the permanence of England and the isolated, floating sanctuary of the ship. At the top of the ramp, the rectangular cut in the black steel hull radiates a deeply inviting, golden warmth. This is the first-class entrance port. It is not merely a door. It is a massive, brilliantly illuminated threshold cut directly into the heavy flank of the ship. 2 Cunard Line stewards wait at the entrance. They stand with a rigid, architectural stillness. Their uniforms are immaculately tailored, and their white cotton gloves are perfectly clean, folded with sharp, geometric creases at the wrists, providing a stark, hygienic contrast to the soot and brine of the harbor. They do not shout over the noise of the wind. They do not rush. They offer a silent, measured nod, a gesture so entirely composed that it seems to lower the temperature of your own anxiety. It is here, before you cross the heavy brass sill, that we must consider our first yawn-worthy historical footnote of the evening: the deeply bureaucratic and utterly exhausting etiquette of the 1920s steamer trunk. In this golden era of transatlantic travel, crossing the ocean does not simply involve packing a bag. It is a highly orchestrated logistical campaign, governed by strict administrative rules. A proper first-class passenger travels with an armada of leather, brass, and vulcanized fiber. There are wardrobe trunks, hat boxes, portmanteaus, and heavy wooden crates. The physical construction of these trunks is a testament to the rigors of early travel. They are built from layers of cured wood, wrapped in hardened canvas or fine leather, and reinforced at every corner with thick, polished brass caps. The brass is designed to absorb the brutal impacts of the cargo holds, while the interior is lined with delicate, patterned linen, featuring an intricate network of wooden hangers, velvet-lined drawers, and silk tie-downs. It is a portable, self-contained closet, engineered to endure the pitch and roll of the deep ocean without disturbing the crease of a single trouser leg. But the staterooms, as luxurious as they are, cannot possibly accommodate such a massive volume of luggage. Therefore, the Cunard Line enforces a strictly color-coded, intensely organized taxonomy of labels. Weeks before you even arrived at this freezing pier, your life was divided into 2 distinct psychological categories. The first category, governed by a brightly colored, heavily glued paper label, reads, "Wanted in stateroom." These specific trunks are engineered to precise dimensions, designed specifically to slide with a satisfying, frictional sigh underneath your brass bed. They contain the absolute necessities for a 6-day crossing: your evening wear for the grand dining saloon, your heavy tweeds for the promenade deck, your reading materials, and your sleeping attire. The second category, bearing a different, far colder directive, reads, "Not wanted on voyage." These immense, cavernous trunks are banished to the dark, freezing holds deep within the belly of the ship. They are entombed far beneath the waterline, completely inaccessible until the skyline of New York finally breaks the horizon. It was considered a minor tragedy and a sign of severe organizational incompetence to mistakenly pack one's dinner jacket in a trunk marked "Not Wanted on Voyage." To do so meant facing the unthinkable prospect of dining in simple daytime tweed, an error that the chief dining steward would pretend not to notice, while absolutely noticing. The glue used on these paper labels was notoriously permanent, a thick, starchy paste that bonded with the leather of the trunk, ensuring that the ship's bureaucracy outlasted the journey itself. There's something deeply soothing about this level of administrative control. The burden of deciding what you need has been formalized, categorized, and handled by men in white gloves. You are required only to exist. You assure the steward that your labels have been properly affixed, and your trunks are waiting in your cabin. He offers another discreet, approving nod. You step forward, and your leather shoe crosses the heavy brass threshold of the watertight bulkhead. The sensory shift is immediate, and it is profound. The freezing, damp fog of Southampton vanishes the exact second you clear the doorway. The chaotic noise of the harbor, the crying gulls, the groaning cranes, is instantly and permanently severed. You are enveloped in a sudden, heavy, velvet silence. This is not an accident. It is the architecture of insulation. Naval engineers have painstakingly layered cork, dense felt, and heavy timber between the outer steel hull and the interior walls to ensure that the violence of the outside world is reduced to a polite, distant rumor. The air inside the vestibule is temperate, dry, and completely still. It carries the faint, comforting scent of beeswax polish, pressed linen, and the subtle aroma of expensive pipe tobacco lingering in the heavy fabrics. You look down and notice that your footsteps make absolutely no sound. The steel decks have been covered in a thick, hand-woven Axminster carpet, colored in muted tones of burgundy and gold. The pile of the wool is so dense that it absorbs the physical weight of your arrival, erasing any residual echo of the docks. Walking here feels more like gliding. You look up at the walls. They are paneled in rare Marconi wood, an African mahogany specifically chosen not for its ability to reflect light, but for its capacity to absorb it. The grain of the wood is tight, deeply symmetrical, and polished to a low, honey-colored luster. It catches the amber glow of the frosted glass chandeliers in soft, diffused pools, creating a hushed, library-like reverence. The ceiling is adorned with intricate plasterwork, molded into delicate geometric patterns that draw the eye upward, further expanding the illusion of terrestrial space. Nothing here suggests the utilitarian harshness of a ship. It does not look like the interior of a nautical vessel. It looks like the hallway of an impossibly grand country estate that has simply decided to float. You feel your shoulders drop. The tension of the freezing pier begins to melt away into the heavy, upholstered silence of the room. You are completely safe, wrapped in layers of steel, cork, and Persian wool. Before you move deeper into the ship, you turn back to look at the entrance one last time. Two deckhands, moving with the unhurried precision of men who have performed this task 1,000 times, begin to secure the gangway door. This is not a standard door. It is a solid steel, watertight bulkhead, lined with a thick perimeter of industrial rubber, swinging on massive iron hinges that have been packed with heavy grease. With a slow, deliberate heave, they push the door shut. It moves with a smooth, silent glide until the rubber meets the steel frame. Then, they turn the heavy brass wheel in the center of the door, engaging the locking dogs one by one. You hear the deep, metallic clack of the steel mechanisms seating themselves into place, followed by the tight squeak of rubber compressing against metal. Each toggle locks into place with the finality of a bank vault. The seal is perfect. The harbor, the cold, and the chaotic reality of the English coast are permanently locked outside. You are now sealed inside an engineered sanctuary of warmth and mahogany, severed from the earth and ready to drift. You leave the grand vestibule behind, turning slowly into the long, perfectly straight corridor that leads toward the midship staterooms. The symmetry of this hallway is a quiet, reassuring marvel of early 20th century naval architecture. It stretches out before you in an unbroken line of polished mahogany and frosted amber light, drawing your eye down a vanishing point that seems entirely too vast to exist inside a moving vessel. There is a profound psychological comfort in this rigid geometry. The straight lines and perfect right angles offer a silent, structural promise that the chaos of the ocean, the unpredictable heave and roll of the freezing North Atlantic, has been mathematically conquered by British engineers. As you walk, you become aware of a deeply specific, heavily engineered silence. This brings us to a wonderfully yawn-worthy historical footnote concerning the exhaustive science of 1920s maritime acoustics. In a lesser ship, walking down a steel corridor would be an abrasive, resonant experience. You would hear the constant, echoing vibration of the hull, the distant whine of electrical dynamos, and the rushing crash of the harbor water against the outer iron plates. The ship would sound exactly like what it is, a hollow iron drum suspended in a hostile sea. But the designers of the Aquitania viewed noise not merely as a nuisance, but as a fundamental failure of hospitality. To achieve this heavy, velvet hush, the naval architects employed an exhaustive, manual science of soundproofing. The beautiful mahogany panels you see on either side of you are merely a decorative facade. Behind them lies a complex, hidden anatomy of insulation. Between the raw steel bulkheads and the polished wood interior, laborers hand-packed hundreds of thousands of square feet of compressed Portuguese cork. This cork was harvested, baked into dense, heavy blocks, and wedged tightly between the iron ribs of the ship. The cellular structure of the cork is naturally chaotic, designed by nature to trap and fracture sound waves before they can resonate. But the cork was only the first layer of defense. Over the cork, engineers draped thick, heavy sheets of dense sheep's wool felt, followed by a carefully measured cushion of dead air, before finally installing the interior wooden frames. The wooden frames themselves do not bolt directly to the steel, but rather rest upon small, vulcanized rubber dampeners that sever the acoustic bridge entirely. This triple-layered barrier of steel, cork, and heavy felt acts as a massive acoustic sponge. It absorbs the high-frequency hiss of the freezing sea and dampens the low-frequency rumble of the ship's own internal machinery. It is an architecture of silence, designed to swallow the violent reality of the ocean and reduce it to a polite, distant sigh. Your footsteps continue down the corridor, entirely muted by the thick pile of the Axminster carpet runner. The wool is dyed in rich shades of burgundy and gold, weaving a complex floral pattern that distracts the eye from the sheer length of the hallway. The air in the corridor is perfectly temperate, warmed by hidden steam pipes that circulate discreetly beneath the floorboards. It carries a faint, comforting aroma, a blend of beeswax polish, starched linen, and the very subtle, dry heat of the cast iron radiators. You pass door after door, each one a solid slab of heavy timber, fitted with polished brass hardware that catches the light of the amber sconces in slow, passing glimmers. The doors are spaced with mathematical patience, each one guarding its own private sanctuary in the dark. Finally, you arrive at your own. You reach out and grasp the heavy brass handle of your stateroom door. The metal is cool to the touch, and it operates with a deeply satisfying, oiled precision. There is no rattle, no loose tolerance in the mechanism. As you press the latch, it yields with a heavy, metallic click, and the thick door swings inward on silent, perfectly balanced hinges. You step over the raised brass sill and close the door behind. The latch engages with a soft thud, compressing the air slightly, and the last faint whisper of the corridor is entirely erased. You are now in the absolute, isolated heart of the ship. The stateroom does not attempt to mimic the nautical themes of older, less confident vessels. There are no exposed rivets here, no utilitarian bunks or swinging lanterns. The room is a curated, aggressively civilized argument against the freezing ocean waiting just beyond the hall. The lighting is subdued, provided by frosted amber sconces that cast a soft, honey-colored glow across the heavy mahogany wardrobe and the plush velvet armchair in the corner, waiting for you. Resting exactly where the white-gloved stewards promised it would be is your heavy leather trunk, the paper label reading "Wanted in Stateroom," still gripping the brass-reinforced lid with bureaucratic stubbornness. But the true centerpiece of the room, and the ultimate symbol of transatlantic luxury, is the bed. This is not a mattress bolted to a steel bulkhead. It is a massive, freestanding bedstead forged from solid brass. The thick, cylindrical brass posts catch the amber light, reflecting it in warm, vertical bands. The metalwork is heavy and uncompromising, offering a visual anchor in the center of the room. You walk toward it, running your hand lightly along the edge of the mattress. The linens are a study in tactile indulgence. They are woven from the finest Sea Island cotton, a material prized in the 1920s for its impossibly long fibers and exceptional smoothness. The thread count is high, giving the fabric a cool, crisp finish that feels almost like heavy silk beneath your fingers. The sheets have been laundered, pressed with heavy irons, and tucked around the mattress with a rigid, military precision that refuses to wrinkle. Resting at the foot of the bed, folded into a perfect, symmetrical rectangle, is a heavy camel hair blanket. It is dense, fibrous, and carries a profound physical weight, waiting to provide a final layer of insulation against the imaginary chill of the ocean. To your right is a small writing desk, crafted from polished walnut. A heavy crystal inkwell sits in the center, flanked by thick, cream-colored Cunard line stationery that will likely remain blank. Above the desk, a small, frosted amber sconce provides a dedicated pool of light, illuminating the deep, intricate grain of the wood. A tiny, almost invisible wooden lip runs around the perimeter of the desk, a quiet, structural acknowledgement that the table will soon be tilting against the horizon. It is a polite restraint, designed to prevent a dropped pen or a wandering glass from slipping onto the carpet during a heavy swell. You take off your heavy overcoat, hanging it in the cedar-lined wardrobe where the wood releases a faint, incredibly calming scent. You unlace your boots, leaving them resting on the thick carpet, and you sit on the edge of the mattress. It yields slowly, a deep, supportive compression of hand-tied steel coils and horsehair stuffing, engineered specifically to absorb the microscopic movements of the human body and the macroscopic movements of the ship alike. It does not swallow you, it holds you. The air in the room is still, smelling faintly of lavender and the dry, warm scent of heated brass. You look toward the far wall. There, set deep into the steel plating, is the porthole. It is constructed of thick, heavy marine glass, bolted shut with massive brass clamps. A heavy, burgundy velvet curtain has been drawn tightly across it, but left just slightly parted. The fabric is dense, pleated perfectly, serving as the final, soft barrier between your sanctuary and the industrial reality of the pier. You close your eyes for a moment, allowing the absolute stillness of the stateroom to settle over your thoughts. And then, the stillness changes. You do not hear the departure. You feel it. There is no dramatic blast from the ship's whistle to startle you. No sudden, violent lurch of steel. No shouting from the docks. The luxury of the Aquitania is defined by what it chooses to omit, and it has chosen to omit the vulgarity of a sudden departure. Instead, there is a shift in the physical reality of the floorboards beneath you. Deep within the cavernous, unlit belly of the ship, 60 feet below the waterline, the massive steam valves have been opened. The sheer physics of this moment are staggering. 4 immense manganese-bronze propellers, each weighing over 30 tons, are resting in the freezing, black sludge of the harbor. For days, they have been entirely motionless. But now, driven by the slow, deliberate release of high-pressure steam, the massive steel propeller shafts begin to turn. It is a slow, agonizingly heavy rotation. The massive bronze blades bite into the freezing brine, displacing thousands of gallons of water with a single, sweeping revolution. Up here, in the gilded silence of your stateroom, this monumental transfer of energy registers only as a deep, continuous thrum. It is a vibration so low, so fundamentally heavy, that it bypasses your ears entirely and enters directly into the marrow of your bones. It travels up through the heavy steel frames, dampened and softened by the layers of Portuguese cork and sheep's wool, until it reaches the mahogany floorboards as a gentle, rhythmic pulse. The brass bedpost beside you hums with a faint, microscopic resonance. The water in the crystal carafe on the bedside table does not spill. It does not even ripple. It merely shivers, a tiny, liquid acknowledgement of the immense power waking up far below. You open your eyes and look toward the thick, circular glass of the porthole. Beyond the glass, the freezing fog remains, but the faint, struggling halos of the wrought iron gas lamps on the pier are no longer stationary. Very slowly, with a glacial, unhurried majesty, the lights of Southampton begin to slide backward into the mist. The gangways have been severed. The heavy mooring lines have been cast off and dropped into the black water. The physical tether to the continent has been quietly, permanently broken. The ship does not feel as though it is moving forward. Rather, it feels as though the entire mass of the earth is slowly being pulled away, leaving you suspended in a warm, perfectly lit pocket of mahogany and brass. The deep, rhythmic thrum of the turbines settles into a steady, heartbeat-like cadence. As the massive steel hull begins to push through the resistance of the harbor water, the ship flexes. It is an intentional design. A rigid ship would shatter under the immense pressure of the ocean. The naval architects designed the superstructure to bend and yield, to negotiate with the water rather than fight it. The polished mahogany panels in the corridor, the walnut writing desk, the wooden floorboards beneath your bed, they all begin to groan very softly. It is a slow, drawn-out, creaking sound, like a heavy wooden door opening in slow motion. It is the sound of the ship settling into its own enormous weight, a structural sigh that will accompany you for the next 6 days. The thrum of the engines, the faint, rhythmic vibration in the brass bed, and the slow, stretching groan of the woodwork combine to create a deeply hypnotic, mechanical lullaby. You are moving. The freezing fog of Southampton, the chaotic docks, the noise and the cold are falling further and further behind, swallowed by the dark water. You pull the heavy camel hair blanket over your shoulders, leaning back against the cool Sea Island cotton pillows. The weight of the wool is deeply comforting, an anchor against the slow, rhythmic sway of the floating world. The room is dark, the amber light is soft, and the heavy, unbroken rhythm of the voyage is taken over. You sink deeper into the pristine mattress, letting the deep, measured thrum of the ship's engines dictate the slowing rhythm of your own breath. You remain perfectly still beneath the heavy camel hair blanket. The air in the stateroom is dark and warm, and entirely undisturbed by the freezing maritime wind tearing across the open decks high above. The Sea Island cotton sheets have adjusted to the exact temperature of your resting body, creating a perfect, insulated envelope of heavy fabric and quiet luxury. Your eyes are closed, but your mind is awake, drifting slowly in the dark. As you lie there, the physical boundaries of the room begin to soften. The polished mahogany walls, the heavy brass bedposts, the thick Axminster carpet, they all begin to feel less like solid objects and more like a gentle, floating suggestion of architecture. The only constant, the only absolute certainty in the dark, is the vibration. It is a low, resonant thrum that enters the soles of your feet, travels up the heavy brass frame of the bed, and settles deep within your chest. It is a steady, mechanical heartbeat, impossibly deep and entirely unwavering. Tonight, we will allow your thoughts to follow that vibration downward. We will leave the gilded silence of the first-class sanctuary and drift down through the floorboards, passing through the heavy layers of Portuguese cork and sheep's wool, descending through the silent, carpeted corridors of B-deck and C-deck, moving past the darkened, cavernous expanse of the grand dining saloon, down and down into the monolithic steel belly of the ship. Far below the waterline, beneath the freezing surface of the North Atlantic, there is a world of controlled, industrial patience. This is the mechanical heart of the RMS Aquitania. It is a space of massive, riveted iron bulkheads and endless networks of heavy steel piping. Down here, there is no polished Marconi wood, no frosted amber glass. There is only the raw, functional reality of early 20th century thermodynamics. Imagine the boiler rooms. They are vast, cathedral-like spaces of iron and heat, entirely separated from the quiet luxury of your stateroom by thick, watertight steel doors. Inside these caverns sit 21 massive, double-ended Scotch marine boilers. They are immense steel cylinders holding thousands of gallons of purified water. In the shadows, illuminated only by the fierce orange glow of the open furnace doors, are the firemen and the trimmers. They do not rush. They do not panic. They move with a rhythmic, heavy, hypnotic precision. The shoveling of coal into the roaring fires is not a frantic activity. It is a choreographed, pendulum-like swing of iron against iron. A scrape, a lift, a heavy, satisfying thud as the black coal is fed into the incandescent heat. It is an endless, tireless repetition, a cycle of labor that converts the ancient, compressed energy of the earth into the driving force of the floating palace. Inside the massive steel boilers, the heat transfers through thick iron tubes, boiling the purified water into steam. Before the steam even begins its journey, before the first heavy iron valve is opened, there is a process of communication that governs this entire mechanical cathedral. It is a system completely devoid of shouting, completely insulated from the panic of the ocean. It is the engine order telegraph. High above, on the freezing, wind-swept bridge of the ship, the captain stands in the dark. He does not speak directly to the men in the engine room. He communicates through a heavy, polished brass pedestal bolted to the deck. On the face of this dial are words etched into the metal. Simple, absolute commands. Ahead, slow, half, full. When the decision is made to increase the speed of the vessel, the captain grasps the heavy brass handle and pushes it forward. There is no immediate rush of speed. There is only a mechanical chain reaction. The movement of the handle pulls a series of long, tensioned bronze wires that run vertically down through the entire height of the ship, plunging through the first-class decks, through the dining rooms, through the cargo holds, until they reach an identical brass dial in the sweltering heat of the engine room. When the wires pull, a loud, piercing brass bell rings out over the roar of the boilers. Clang, clang. The engineer on duty, a man wearing a heavy canvas apron and carrying a cotton rag to wipe the grease from his hands, does not rush. He steps calmly to the dial, grasps the matching brass handle, and pulls it to the exact same position, sending a signal back up to the bridge to confirm that the order has been received. It is a slow, deeply bureaucratic exchange of mechanical gestures, an entirely silent conversation spoken in the language of bronze wire and brass bells, coordinating the movement of 45,000 tons of steel across the void. Only after this protocol is strictly observed does the engineer turn his attention to the massive cast iron maneuvering valves. These are not simple taps. They are massive wheels, requiring the strength of 2 men to turn. As the wheel slowly rotates, it lifts a heavy steel gate, allowing the screaming, high-pressure steam to flow from the boilers into the engines. This brings us to a wonderfully dry, heavily engineered, and entirely yawn-worthy historical footnote. The mechanics of the Parsons quadruple expansion steam turbines. Before the invention of the turbine, ships were driven by massive, thumping, reciprocating engines, giant iron pistons that crashed up and down with violent, bone-shaking force. They were magnificent, but they were completely incompatible with the concept of a silent, restful sleep. The reciprocating engine did not hum, it hammered. But the designers of the Aquitania demanded a mechanical courtesy, a way to generate immense power without disturbing the crystal water glasses in the dining room. or the resting passengers in the brass beds above? Their answer was the steam turbine, pioneered by the brilliant engineer Charles Parsons. The steam generated in the boiler rooms is channeled into massive, heavily insulated steel pipes. It is chaotic, highly pressurized, and desperate to expand. It travels at blinding speed through the labyrinth of valves until it reaches the heavy iron casing of the turbine. Inside this casing is a solid steel rotor, and attached to this rotor are thousands upon thousands of tiny, perfectly angled brass and steel blades. The central shaft of the turbine, forged from a single ingot of high tensile steel, weighs over 130 tons. It is suspended in the dark casing, resting on heavy bearings coated in white metal. To spin an object of this immense weight, thousands of times a minute, without tearing the ship apart, requires an impossible degree of perfect mathematical balance. If the rotor were unbalanced by even a few ounces, the resulting vibration would shake the ship to pieces. Before the rotor was ever installed, it was placed on a massive lathe in the shipyards. For weeks, master machinists used microscopic instruments to measure the balance of the steel. They shaved off imperceptible ribbons of metal, adjusting the weight with a delicate, obsessive precision. There are over 1 million individual blades inside the engine room of this ship. Each one was fitted by hand, slotted into the heavy steel rotor. They were bound together with silver wire and soldered into place to ensure they could withstand the terrifying centrifugal force of the spin. When the high-pressure steam enters the turbine, it strikes the first row of blades, forcing the rotor to spin. The steam then expands, cooling slightly, and moves to the next row of slightly larger blades, and the next, and the next. The steam does not simply push these blades. It flows through them in a highly engineered aerodynamic dance. The blades are curved like the wings of a bird, designed to capture the exact maximum amount of kinetic energy from the vapor before letting it pass. The violent, chaotic energy of the boiling water is captured, mathematically divided, and transformed entirely into smooth, continuous, unyielding rotational force. There is no crashing piston. There is no violent change of direction. There is only a seamless, endless spinning. It is an environment of absolute extremes. The steam entering the high-pressure turbine is superheated, blistering enough to melt lead. But as it expands through the intermediate and low-pressure turbines, it cools rapidly. By the time it reaches the massive vacuum condenser, it is little more than a lukewarm mist. The condenser is a marvel of maritime resourcefulness. It is a massive iron chamber filled with thousands of thin brass tubes. Through these tubes, the freezing black water of the North Atlantic is constantly pumped. The exhausted steam hits the freezing brass, instantly condensing back into liquid water. This creates a massive vacuum, a complete absence of pressure that actually pulls the steam through the final stages of the turbine, extracting the very last fraction of energy. It is an act of engineering that literally uses the freezing hostility of the ocean to pull the ship forward. The condensed water is then collected, filtered to remove any microscopic traces of lubricating oil, and pumped silently back into the massive Scotch boilers to begin the cycle again. It is a closed, perfect, unending thermodynamic loop, a closed loop of heat, motion, and polite, mathematical rotation. But this creates a profound engineering dilemma. The steam turbine is incredibly efficient, but it spins at a terrifying velocity, thousands of revolutions per minute. If you were to connect this rapidly spinning turbine directly to the propeller would simply carve a useless, chaotic hole in the water, generating absolutely no forward momentum. The frantic speed of the turbine must be calmed. The high-pitched whine of the spinning brass blades must be translated into a slow, heavy, majestic push. To achieve this, the engineers installed the reduction gears. Imagine a set of interlocking steel wheels, so large they dwarf the men who built them. They are housed inside massive cast iron casings, entirely sealed off from the outside world. The small gear, attached to the rapidly spinning turbine, meshes perfectly with the teeth of a much larger gear, which is attached to the propeller shaft. This is the physics of mechanical diplomacy. The teeth of these gears are cut with a helical slant, an angled geometry designed to ensure that the metal faces slide into one another with absolute, continuous contact. There is no clashing of gears, no jarring impact. It is a constant, silent meshing of polished steel. To prevent the metal from destroying itself under the immense friction, the gears are bathed in a continuous, heavy deluge of thick, amber-colored lubricating oil. The oil is pumped from massive reservoirs, flowing over the spinning steel teeth in a viscous, golden waterfall. It absorbs the heat, cushions the microscopic imperfections in the metal, and ensures that the transfer of thousands of horsepower remains entirely fluid. Through the elegant mathematical ratio of these oiled gears, the frantic, high-speed rotation of the turbine is reduced. It is divided down, calmed, and translated into a deliberate, overwhelmingly powerful rotation of just 160 revolutions per minute. 160 slow, sweeping turns of the propeller every 60 seconds. The chaotic energy of the steam has been disciplined. It has been civilized. This slow, massive rotation is fed into the propeller shafts, thick columns of forged steel, stretching for hundreds of feet through the dark, narrow tunnels at the very bottom of the hull. They rest in heavy, greased bearings, turning endlessly in the dark. At the very end of the line, passing through a watertight gland in the stern of the ship, the shaft connects to the massive manganese-bronze propellers. As the heavy blades carve through the freezing, black water of the North Atlantic, they generate an immense forward thrust, pushing the 45,000-ton steel palace across the void. But according to the laws of physics, every action has an equal and opposite reaction. The ocean resists the propeller, pushing back with millions of pounds of force. If this force were left unchecked, the propeller shaft would act like a giant steel spear, driving itself straight forward and tearing the engines apart. To prevent this, the engineers designed the thrust block. It is a massive, heavily reinforced iron collar, anchored directly to the strongest structural ribs of the ship's hull. Inside the collar, a series of thick steel rings on the spinning shaft press against stationary pads coated in white metal and flooded with heavy oil. The thrust block absorbs the entire, staggering weight of the ocean's resistance. It takes the violent, chaotic push of the propellers and distributes it smoothly and evenly into the steel skeleton of the ship itself. It is the thrust block that finally translates the burning of coal into the forward motion of your brass bed. And it is the thrust block that sends that deep, resonant vibration traveling up through the steel ribs of the hull. This is the exhaustive, invisible effort required to afford you the luxury of lying completely still. The men in the stokehold, the heavy bronze telegraph wires, the millions of silver soldered brass blades, the massive reduction gears bathed in golden oil, and the heavy bronze propellers carving into the freezing sea. They are all working in a synchronized, mechanical symphony, entirely dedicated to the preservation of your comfort. Your mind begins to drift slowly upward, leaving the heat and the oil of the engine rooms behind. You rise back up through the cavernous, unlit dining saloons, through the thick, deadening layers of cork and sheep's wool, up through the burgundy Axminster carpets of the first-class corridors, until you return quietly to the warm, dark sanctuary of your stateroom. The violent energy of the boilers, the frantic spinning of the turbines, and the massive, crushing forces of the thrust block have all been filtered, dampened, and reduced to a polite, distant rumor. By the time that energy reaches the mahogany floorboards beneath you, it is nothing more than a gentle, rhythmic pulse in the heavy brass frame of your bed. It is a mechanical lullaby, engineered over decades, crafted by thousands of hands, all to ensure that your sleep is deep, continuous, and entirely undisturbed by the reality of the freezing ocean outside your porthole. You take a slow, deep breath, feeling the heavy camel hair blanket rise and fall. Your heart rate begins to slow, matching the patient, unhurried rhythm of the oiled gears far below, drifting deeper and deeper into the heavy, gilded silence of the night. You remain resting in the heavy, gilded silence of your stateroom, anchored securely within the warm brass frame of your bed. The ship continues its slow, mechanical breathing beneath you. The deep, unyielding rotation of the turbines pushes the immense steel hull through the freezing void, while the layers of Portuguese cork and thick sheep's wool keep the reality of the ocean entirely at bay. But in the quiet isolation of the deep night, your mind begins to wander. You imagine leaving the heavy, insulated sanctuary of your cabin. You imagine rising from the crisp Sea Island cotton, pulling a heavy wool dressing gown over your shoulders, and stepping out of the mahogany doorway. You walk slowly down the dimly lit, perfectly symmetrical corridors of A-Deck. The thick, burgundy Axminster carpet completely absorbs the sound of your imaginary footsteps, offering a soft, muted resistance against the soles of your shoes. The frosted amber sconces cast their familiar, honey-colored pools of light, guiding you through the sleeping palace. At the very end of the long corridor, there is a heavy door constructed of solid oak and reinforced with thick plates of polished brass. You push the heavy brass handle downward. The door opens outward with a soft, pneumatic sigh, and you step across the raised steel threshold, leaving the carpeted interior of the ship behind, and entering the first-class enclosed promenade. The environment here is subtly different. It is a transitional space, a carefully engineered buffer zone that exists exactly halfway between the luxurious, climate-controlled interior of the ship and the lethal, freezing violence of the North Atlantic. The air on the promenade is remarkably cooler, carrying the sharp, undeniable scent of salt brine and marine varnish. The temperature is strictly managed by heavy, cast-iron steam pipes running discreetly along the inner bulkheads, ensuring the air is crisp and invigorating, but never freezing. You look down at the floor beneath your feet. The thick wool carpets have been replaced by the flawless, rigid geometry of the promenade deck. It is constructed entirely of solid Burmese teak. Teak is a heavy, dense, tropical hardwood, chosen by naval architects for its profound natural resistance to salt water and its incredible physical durability. But the planks do not simply rest against one another. They are laid in perfectly straight, parallel lines that follow the subtle curve of the ship's hull, separated by thin strips of black marine pitch. This brings us to a quiet, deeply rhythmic detail of early 20th century shipwriting. To ensure the wooden deck is entirely watertight, laborers meticulously pounded strands of oakum, a thick rope fiber soaked in pine tar, deep into the narrow gaps between the heavy teak boards. Once the oakum was hammered tightly into place with a heavy wooden mallet and a caulking iron, the men poured boiling black pitch over the seams, sealing the deck against the corrosive moisture of the sea. Every single morning at dawn, long before the first-class passengers awaken, a crew of sailors scrubs this massive expanse of wood on their hands and knees. They use heavy blocks of sandstone, known in the nautical world as holy stones, grinding them rhythmically back and forth across the wet timber. The friction of the heavy stone, combined with the abrasive grit of salt water and sand, bleaches the teak to a pale, bone-white perfection, leaving the deck impossibly smooth and completely level. You walk slowly across the pristine wood, listening to the faint, hollow echo of your leather slippers. To your left is the solid steel wall of the ship's superstructure, painted in a thick, glossy white enamel that catches the dim light of the overhead amber bulb. To your right is the edge of the world. The enclosed promenade is lined with massive, heavy windows set into thick brass frames. You walk toward the glass, stopping just a few inches away from the cold, transparent barrier. Because it is the middle of the night, the glass acts as a dark mirror, reflecting the soft amber lamps of the promenade and the faint, ghostly outline of your own silhouette. But if you press your face close to the pane, shielding your eyes from the interior light, the reflection vanishes, and you are confronted with the absolute, terrifying reality of the North Atlantic. There is nothing out there. It is a pitch-black, bottomless void. The ocean at 2 o'clock in the morning does not have a horizon. The freezing black water simply merges with the freezing black sky in an endless, suffocating darkness. You cannot see the waves, but you can sense their immense, crushing weight. You can see the sudden, violent bursts of white foam as the heavy steel bow of the Aquitania shears through the massive ocean swells, throwing thousands of gallons of freezing brine into the air. The spray hits the thick marine glass just inches from your face. A sudden, silent splattering of salt water that streaks slowly down the pane. The contrast is staggering. Just a fraction of an inch beyond that cold glass is a chaotic, freezing wilderness that would extinguish human life in a matter of minutes. But here, standing on the pale teak floorboards, the air is warm. The amber lights glow with a steady, bureaucratic patience. The deep, unyielding thrum of the Parsons turbines hums faithfully beneath your feet. You are entirely safe, insulated from the void by British steel and mathematical precision. You turn away from the dark window, letting the ocean recede into the background of your mind. Lined up against the inner white bulkhead, running the entire length of the seemingly endless promenade, is a perfectly straight row of empty wooden deck chairs. In the bright, freezing sunlight of the afternoon, this deck is the absolute epicenter of high society. But now, in the heavy silence of the night, the chairs sit empty, their slatted wooden frames folded neatly backward in a state of quiet, geometric rest. This brings us to our next, wonderfully tedious historical footnote of the evening. the immensely rigid and highly bureaucratic etiquette of the first-class deck chair. In the 1920s, securing a deck chair was not a simple matter of walking outside and sitting down. It was a complex, highly orchestrated negotiation of social hierarchy and administrative control. The moment you boarded the ship in Southampton, long before the vessel ever slipped its moorings, you were expected to seek out a man of immense, invisible power, the chief deck steward. He stood at a small mahogany podium, wearing a pristine white uniform with brass buttons, holding a heavy, leather-bound ledger. You did not choose your chair. The chief deck steward assigned it to you. The location of your chair was a silent, public broadcast of your social standing. The most desirable locations were located midship, strictly on the leeward side of the vessel, protected entirely from the bitter, biting wind of the Atlantic, and situated far enough away from the massive funnels to ensure that an uninvited speck of coal soot would never land upon a lady's silk scarf. Once your location was negotiated, the steward would produce a small, thick card made of cream-colored parchment. He would write your name in careful, looping calligraphy and slide the card into a small brass frame bolted directly to the top of the wooden chair. For the next 6 days, that specific arrangement of beech wood and brass was your personal, heavily defended territory. But securing the chair was only the beginning of the etiquette. The unwritten rules of the Promenade dictated a strict code of intentional isolation. When you occupied your chair, you were inevitably placed mere inches away from another passenger, sharing the same freezing ocean air and the same pale teak floorboards. However, high society demanded that you entirely ignore their existence. It was considered a severe breach of decorum, a sign of deep social anxiety, to initiate a frivolous conversation with the person sitting next to you. You were expected to read a heavy, leather-bound novel, or stare out at the gray, rolling horizon with a look of profound, melancholic indifference. If a neighbor attempted to break the silence with an unsolicited observation about the weather, it was entirely permissible, and, in fact, encouraged, to deliver the cut direct, a slow, unblinking stare that communicated an absolute refusal to engage, before returning your eyes to the sea. The deck chair was a sanctuary of shared, orchestrated isolation, a place where the elite could rest, entirely unburdened by the exhausting demands of terrestrial conversation. But the most physically comforting ritual of the Promenade, and the one that requires the most precise architectural description, is the process of actually sitting down. In the freezing wind of the North Atlantic, one does not simply recline in a wooden chair. One must be properly insulated. When you approached your reserved chair in the afternoon, a deck steward would immediately materialize from the shadows. He did not speak. He carried a massive, incredibly heavy blanket, woven from pure Scottish wool, or thick, undyed camel hair. The weight of this blanket is difficult to overstate. It was a dense, fibrous shield, designed to trap the body's natural heat and completely deflect the freezing maritime draft. You would recline into the angled wooden slats of the chair, and the steward would begin the ritual known in the nautical world as the mummy wrap. It was a process of precise, origami-like folding. First, he would drape the heavy wool over your lap, letting the thick fabric fall entirely over your legs and feet. Then, with a practiced sweeping motion, he would lift your leather boots slightly, folding the heavy fabric tightly underneath your heels, ensuring that not a single draft of freezing air could enter from the bottom. Next, he would pull the edges of the blanket taut, wrapping them firmly around the sides of your calves and your thighs, tucking the heavy wool deep into the narrow space between your body and the wooden armrests. Finally, he would smooth the top of the blanket flat across your chest, pinning the edges beneath your elbows. You were entirely immobilized. Your arms were pinned, your legs were bound, and your feet were sealed in a heavy, fibrous cocoon of extreme warmth. You could not stand up, you could not adjust your position, and you could not easily reach for a dropped book. You had entirely surrendered your physical mobility to the care of the Cunard line. It was a profound psychological comfort. The sheer physical weight of the heavy wool pressing down on your chest and legs acted as a deep, grounding anchor against the slow, rhythmic tilting of the ship. Immobilized in the heavy tartan fabric, with the freezing sea wind biting at your cheeks and the warmth of the wool radiating through your layers of tweed, you were forced to simply exist. You were forced to watch the endless, hypnotic rolling of the gray waves and listen to the muffled, rhythmic crashing of the water against the steel hull. If you required sustenance, you did not leave your chair. You simply waited. At exactly 11 o'clock every morning, a procession of stewards would emerge onto the freezing deck, carrying heavy silver trays loaded with delicate porcelain cups of steaming beef bouillon. It was a dense, salty, restorative liquid, believed by the medical authorities of the era to fortify the constitution against the rigors of the sea air. You imagine the absurdity of it all. Dozens of the wealthiest, most powerful people in the world, bound tightly in heavy wool, staring blankly at a freezing ocean, sipping salty beef broth in absolute collective silence. But now, as your mind wanders through the empty promenade in the dead of night, the stewards are gone. The heavy camel hair blankets are folded and locked away in dark mahogany cabinets. There is only the empty, polished teak. The long shadows cast by the amber bulbs, and the terrifying, pitch-black void of the ocean just beyond the thick marine glass. You stand in the empty space, feeling the slow, majestic rise and fall of the ship beneath your feet. The bow lifts slowly as it encounters a massive ocean swell, hovering for a long, suspended second at the apex of the wave, before beginning its long, deliberate descent into the trough. It is a slow, mathematical pendulum, the rhythm of a floating palace navigating the deep. The heavy teak decking groans softly under the shifting weight, a deep, structural sigh that echoes quietly down the long, empty corridor of the promenade. You feel the cold radiating faintly from the glass window, and you realize how deeply you appreciate the heavy, insulated warmth of your stateroom. Your imaginary walk comes to an end. Your thoughts drift away from the empty wooden chairs, leaving the freezing void of the Atlantic behind the heavy, watertight doors. And you let your mind return to the soft, yielding comfort of your brass bed. The heavy camel hair blanket is resting securely over your chest. The frosted amber sconce casts its faint, honey-colored glow. The Parsons turbines continue their deep, unyielding thrum far below the floorboards. You take a slow, deep breath of the warm, lavender-scented air, letting the heavy, organized isolation of the ship lull you deeper and deeper into the quiet architecture of sleep. Your physical body remains perfectly anchored in the deep, heavy warmth of the brass bed. The camel hair blanket rests firmly across your chest, rising and falling with the slow, measured rhythm of your breath. The frosted amber sconce on the mahogany wall continues its silent vigil, casting a faint, honey-colored outline against the velvet darkness of the stateroom. Far below the thick Axminster carpets, the Parsons steam turbines maintain their endless, unyielding rotation. It is a deep, mechanical heartbeat that vibrates softly through the soles of your feet, a constant reminder that the ship is pushing relentlessly through the freezing void of the North Atlantic. But as you lie there, perfectly still and entirely safe, your mind continues its slow, drifting exploration of the floating palace. You imagine leaving the heavy, insulated quiet of your cabin once more. You let your thoughts drift out into the perfectly symmetrical corridors of A-Deck, passing the closed mahogany doors of the other sleeping passengers, and moving slowly toward the grand, sweeping curve of the first-class staircase. The descent is a masterpiece of quiet architecture. The staircase is an immense, sweeping spiral of wrought iron and polished oak, curving downward with an elegance that seems to defy the structural limitations of a steel hull. Your imaginary footsteps make absolutely no sound on the thick runner, and the only noise in the vast, empty stairwell is the faint, rhythmic groaning of the ship's massive timber frame as it flexes against the ocean swells. You are moving down into the very center of the floating world. At the bottom of the staircase, you stand before a set of towering, double doors, crafted from solid walnut and inlaid with delicate, golden brass filigree. They are closed for the night, sealing off a room that, only hours ago, was the vibrant, chaotic epicenter of transatlantic society. You push the heavy brass handles, and the doors swing inward with a slow, pneumatic hiss, revealing the absolute, breathtaking scale of the first-class dining saloon. It is impossible to overstate the physical dimensions of this space. In a world defined by the claustrophobic, utilitarian constraints of maritime engineering, the designers of the Aquitania carved out a cavernous, three-story void right in the center of the ship's hull. The ceiling soars high above you, vaulted and decorated with intricate, classical plasterwork depicting the triumphs of Neptune. The walls are paneled in pale, ivory-painted wood, intricately carved with the delicate, symmetrical motifs of the Louis XVI style. Great fluted columns rise from the floor to support the ceiling, their capitals adorned with gold leaf that catches the faint, ghostly light of the moon. High above, crowning the center of the room, is a massive, arched skylight constructed of wrought iron and thick, frosted marine glass. Because it is the middle of the night, there is no sunlight pouring down to illuminate the pale boiserie paneling. The skylight serves only to filter the faint, silver glow of the moon, casting a pale, architectural illumination over the hundreds of empty tables scattered across the floor. It looks like the grand ballroom of a European palace that has been entirely abandoned to the sea. During the evening service, this room is a blinding, chaotic symphony of light and noise. It is filled with the clatter of heavy silver, the sharp ring of crystal, the hum of hundreds of performative conversations, and the bright, sweeping melodies of the ship's orchestra playing from a raised mahogany balcony. But now, at 3 o'clock in the morning, the saloon is entirely empty. It is a silent, sleeping cathedral of gastronomy. You step slowly onto the thick carpet, your imaginary footsteps entirely swallowed by the dense wool pile. You walk past the captain's table, a large, circular arrangement of heavy mahogany situated exactly in the center of the room. The chairs are upholstered in rich, burgundy leather, pushed neatly underneath the linen tablecloths with a strict, geometric discipline. The tables themselves are fully set for the morning service, It is a stunning display of administrative confidence. Hundreds of heavy silver forks, knives, and spoons are aligned with mathematical exactitude. Crystal water goblets and delicate porcelain teacups sit perfectly still on the stiff, heavily starched white Irish linen. And then, you notice something profound about the quiet physics of the room. The ship is currently traveling at 23 knots across the open ocean. The North Atlantic is a hostile, unpredictable wilderness of massive, rolling swells. The immense steel hull is carving its way through millions of gallons of freezing water. You can feel the slow, majestic rise and fall of the bow beneath your feet. But as the room gently tilts, you notice that the heavy silver forks do not slide across the starched linen. The tall, delicate crystal water goblets do not tip over. The tall, slender crystal flower vases in the center of each table remain perfectly upright, defying the violent, shifting gravity of the ocean. The table itself, and everything upon it, remains entirely, stubbornly level. How is it possible that this fragile architecture of dining remains completely undisturbed by the violence of the sea? This requires a wonderfully dry, highly technical, and deeply yawn-worthy explanation of early 20th century naval stabilization. The most terrifying, nausea-inducing motion a ship can experience is not the slow, forward pitching of the bow, but the lateral roll. It is that sudden, chaotic tilting from port to starboard, a violent sideways sway that sends luggage crashing across staterooms and shatters hundreds of plates in the galleys below. To prevent the Aquitania from rolling in the heavy seas, the naval architects employed two distinct methods of mechanical diplomacy. The first, and the most rudimentary, is the installation of bilge keels. If you were to let your mind sink deep into the freezing, black water beneath the ship, you would see them. They are two massive, heavy steel fins bolted directly to the outermost curves of the hull, running parallel to the keel for hundreds of feet. These fins do not generate forward momentum. They are entirely passive. Their sole purpose is to create immense, dragging friction when the ship attempts to roll sideways. As the massive steel hull leans to the left, the flat edge of the starboard bilge keel acts as a giant underwater brake, catching thousands of tons of dense salt water and forcefully dampening the sideways momentum. It is a simple, brutal negotiation with physics. The ocean attempts to tilt the ship, and the steel fins drag against the water, bleeding off the chaotic energy before it can ever reach the dining room above. But the bilge keels alone are not enough to ensure the absolute, unwavering composure of a first-class cup of tea. For that, the engineers relied on something far more complex. The massive, heavy gyroscopic stabilizers hidden deep within the belly of the ship. Imagine a massive, solid steel flywheel, weighing over 100 tons, spinning horizontally in a dark, sealed iron chamber near the ship's center of gravity. It is driven by its own dedicated steam engine, spinning at an incredible velocity, independent of the main turbines that drive the propellers. According to the unyielding laws of gyroscopic physics, a massive, rapidly spinning object will aggressively resist any attempt to change its axis of rotation. When a massive ocean wave strikes the side of the hull, attempting to force the ship into a violent roll, the immense, spinning mass of the gyroscope fights back. The steel wheel refuses to tilt. It absorbs the kinetic energy of the wave, transferring that massive, stabilizing counterforce directly into the heavy iron ribs of the ship through a series of hydraulic rams. It is an invisible, exhausting battle fought entirely beneath the floorboards. The freezing ocean crashes against the steel plates, and the 100-ton spinning wheel silently, stubbornly refuses to yield. The engineers referred to this calculated elimination of movement as maritime courtesy. The result of this massive mechanical labor is the eerie, perfect stillness of the crystal goblet resting on the table in front of you. You look closely at the glass. The faint, silver moonlight catches the rim. The glass does not move, but the liquid inside it does. There is a very slow, microscopic shifting of the water level. It rises half an inch on the left side of the glass, hovers for a long, suspended moment, and then slowly recedes, rising on the right side. It is a tiny, liquid metronome, silently keeping time with the vast, rolling rhythm of the ocean outside. This delicate, microscopic motion brings us to our next, heavily bureaucratic footnote of 1920s high society: the immensely rigid and highly stressful etiquette of consuming soup on the North Atlantic. In the grand dining saloons of the era, dinner was not merely a meal. It was an exhausting, multi-course theatrical performance, governed by unwritten laws of profound social anxiety. And the absolute peak of this anxiety, the true test of a passenger's refinement, occurred during the soup course. The first-class menu regularly featured a clear, scalding hot consommé royale, or a heavy cream of asparagus, served in shallow, wide-brimmed porcelain bowls adorned with a single gold leaf stripe. When the ship encountered a particularly heavy swell, one that even the massive spinning gyroscopes could not entirely suppress, the deck would begin to tilt. Very slowly, the mahogany table, the white linen, and the porcelain bowl would angle against the horizon. The hot soup would begin to slide dangerously close to the gilded edge of the porcelain rim. The unwritten rule of the dining room was absolute. You must never, under any circumstances, acknowledge the movement of the ship. To gasp, to reach out and steady your bowl with a panicked hand, or to make a sudden, unseemly comment about the rolling waves, was considered a catastrophic breach of decorum. It was an admission of terrestrial weakness, a sign that you lacked the stoic, maritime constitution required of the elite. You were expected to continue your polite, muted conversation about the fluctuating price of steel or the quality of the string quartet, while acting entirely oblivious to the fact that the architecture of the room was actively fighting gravity. But physics demands a solution. If you did nothing, the soup would spill across the pristine white tablecloth, an equally humiliating disaster that would instantly summon a horrified, white-gloved steward bearing a fresh linen napkin. The accepted, highly delicate solution to this problem was a precise physical maneuver. As the ship began its slow, inevitable roll to the starboard side, sending the hot broth rushing toward the right edge of the bowl, the refined diner would casually, almost imperceptibly, lift the right edge of their porcelain bowl with the very tips of their fingers. You did not lift the bowl into the air. You simply altered its geometry relative to the table. You were expected to tilt the bowl with the roll of the ship. This was a highly scrutinized action. To tilt the bowl artificially away from the roll, or to pull it toward your own chest, was considered an act of profound greed, a visual metaphor suggesting a desperate eagerness to consume the broth. Instead, you gracefully tilted the porcelain in harmony with the ocean, artificially maintaining a perfectly level horizon for the liquid inside. while using your heavy silver spoon to scoop the broth away from your body. This was not merely a practical adjustment. Tilting your bowl with the roll of the ship was considered a sign of true moral fortitude. It demonstrated an innate, aristocratic mastery over your environment. You were acting as your own human gyroscope, calculating the pitch and yaw of the North Atlantic, while maintaining a look of bored, polite disinterest. As the ship slowly righted itself, you would smoothly, seamlessly lower the bowl back onto the saucer, ensuring that the bottom of the porcelain made absolutely no sound against the silver. It was a constant, microscopic negotiation, a physical dance of extreme subtlety performed entirely below the eye line of your dining companions. You would tilt the bowl, take a measured, silent spoonful of broth, lower the bowl, wipe your mouth with the heavy linen napkin, and continue discussing the weather in London. To successfully consume an entire bowl of consommé royale during a North Atlantic gale without spilling a drop, and without ever once breaking the flow of a tedious conversation, was considered a mark of supreme moral fortitude. It proved that your composure was stronger than the ocean itself. If, by some tragic failure of coordination, a drop of soup did spill onto the starched white tablecloth, you were expected to ignore it entirely. To attempt to dab at the stain with a napkin was to draw attention to the failure. Instead, a dining steward would immediately materialize from the shadows, place a crisp, folded white linen napkin directly over the spill with a silent, ghost-like efficiency, and vanish before the conversation even paused. The stain was erased. The failure was covered. The illusion of complete, unbothered control was preserved. You stand in the empty, silent room, imagining the absolute exhaustion of maintaining that level of rigid control for an 8-course meal. The heavy silver cutlery, the crystal glasses, the folded napkins, they all sit perfectly still, waiting for the morning light to return the theater to life. But for now, in the deep, unsupervised hours of the night, the dining room is at rest. The moonlight shifts slowly across the carpet as the ship alters its course slightly. The heavy Marconi wood columns groan, a soft, drawn-out creaking sound that echoes gently up toward the massive, wrought-iron skylight. It is the sound of the ship settling into its own enormous weight, a structural sigh of relief that the exhausting demands of high society have been temporarily suspended. You take one last look at the perfectly aligned tables, feeling the deep, unyielding vibration of the engines humming through the soles of your shoes. The chaotic energy of the freezing ocean is out there, crashing against the steel hull in the dark. But in here, there is only the slow, rhythmic tilting of the crystal water glasses, a tiny, silent reminder that the floating palace is carrying you safely across the void. You turn away from the empty tables, letting your imaginary walk come to an end. You leave the grand dining saloon behind, your thoughts drifting back up through the quiet, carpeted corridors of A-Deck, returning slowly to the warm, isolated sanctuary of your stateroom. The heavy camel hair blanket is still resting securely over your chest. The frosted amber sconce continues its faint, honey-colored glow. You sink deeper into the pristine sea island cotton. The violent roll of the ocean has been conquered by the heavy steel fins and the spinning gyroscopes. The rigid etiquette of the dining room has faded into the dark. There is only the slow, mathematical rhythm of the ship's rolling hull, rocking you gently and quietly into the deep architecture of sleep. Your physical body remains perfectly anchored in the deep, heavy warmth of your brass bed. The camel hair blanket provides a quiet, fibrous weight against your chest, holding you securely as the massive steel hull of the Aquitania continues its slow, rhythmic negotiation with the freezing swells of the North Atlantic. The physical reality of the ocean is entirely sealed away behind the thick marine glass of your porthole. The water is freezing, the night is vast, and you are resting securely within the warm, frosted amber glow of your stateroom. But as the early hours of the morning stretch out, your mind begins one final, quiet excursion through the sleeping palace. You imagine leaving the absolute silence of your cabin, stepping out into the hushed, perfectly symmetrical corridors of the first-class decks, and walking slowly upward. You bypass the sweeping curve of the grand staircase, opting instead for a narrower, steeper set of stairs designed strictly for the officers and crew of the Cunard line. These stairs do not boast the elaborate wrought-iron balustrades or the thick Axminster carpets of the passenger areas. They are lined with thick, utilitarian ribbed rubber designed to muffle the rapid footsteps of men operating on strict maritime schedules. You are moving away from the architecture of luxury and ascending into the highest, most isolated architecture of the ship. You arrive at the boat deck, a place where the polished mahogany paneling yields entirely to the raw, functional reality of the vessel's operational heart. At the end of a short, dimly lit corridor, situated just aft of the captain's bridge, is a heavy steel door. It does not look particularly grand, but it is marked with a small, polished brass plaque bearing a single word: Marconi. This is the wireless telegraphy room. It is the absolute, undeniable nerve center of the floating world. You imagine pushing the heavy brass handle downward, opening the door to a space that feels entirely separate from the opulent, gilded silence of the dining saloons far below. The air inside the Marconi room is distinctly warmer, carrying the faint, dry scent of ozone, heated copper wire, and the incredibly specific aroma of hot glass and melting rosin. It is a technological sanctuary, illuminated not by crystal chandeliers, but by the deep, glowing filaments of the massive radio equipment covering the bulkheads. The walls are lined floor to ceiling with heavy, black bakelite panels, studded with polished brass dials, thick rubber cables, and massive, heavy-duty electrical switches that look capable of harnessing lightning. But the true source of illumination in the room comes from a wall of massive, glowing glass vacuum tubes. These tubes are the heart of the ship's transmitter. They are roughly the size of large glass bottles, burning with a fierce, deep orange-red heat. The intricate networks of wire and metal grids inside them glow with a steady, electrical intensity, casting a warm, amber radiance that fills the tiny room with a profound sense of analog comfort. Sitting at the center of this electronic cathedral is a single, polished walnut desk, bolted securely to the floorboards to prevent it from shifting during a heavy swell. Behind the desk, bathed in the warm, pulsing amber glow of the equipment, sits the senior Marconi operator. He is wearing a crisp white uniform shirt, though his collar is slightly unbuttoned, a quiet concession to the intense heat generated by the vacuum tubes. A heavy set of black Bakelite headphones is clamped tightly over his ears, connecting him to a world of static and silence that exists far beyond the freezing horizon. It is here, in the middle of the freezing ocean, surrounded by thousands of miles of absolute nothingness, that we must consider our next, wonderfully tedious historical footnote: the incredibly complex and highly bureaucratic process of sending a radiogram in 1924. In this era, communication with the terrestrial world is not an instantaneous, frivolous act. It is a severe, incredibly expensive privilege, governed by strict administrative rules and the sheer physical limitations of early radio waves. To the first-class passengers resting in their beds below, the Marconi room represents a magical, invisible tether to their lives in London and New York. But to the men who operate this room, it is a place of relentless, highly structured paperwork. Imagine it is 1 o'clock in the morning. A passenger has decided to send a message to a business associate in Manhattan. The passenger cannot simply write down their thoughts and hand them to a steward. They must navigate the bureaucracy of the void. First, they must procure a specific, heavy stock paper form from the purser's office. This form, printed with the strict, unyielding typography of the Marconi International Marine Communication Company, is divided into rigid columns and numbered boxes. Every single letter, every space, and every punctuation mark must be counted with the utmost precision. The cost of transmitting a message across the Atlantic is staggering, calculated strictly by the word and charged directly to the passenger's folio in British pounds sterling. There is no room for poetic elaboration. The high cost of transmission forces the wealthiest people in the world to adopt a language of extreme, brutal efficiency. A message that might have taken 3 pages of elegant calligraphy on land is violently compressed into exactly 12 essential words. A radiogram reading, "Arriving Tuesday morning. Stop. Weather, fine. Stop. Secure shares. Stop." Might cost the modern equivalent of hundreds of dollars. A minor fortune spent simply to confirm a schedule that had been established months in advance. Once the passenger has carefully, almost painfully, drafted this incredibly brief communication, the form is handed over to the purser. The purser does not simply read it and send it away. He initiates a deeply satisfying, multi-step administrative procedure. He takes the form and places it under the focused beam of a brass desk lamp. He must verify the word count, checking the passenger's math with a thick, dark graphite pencil. He calculates the massive fee based on the distance to the nearest receiving station in Nova Scotia, and logs the exact time of receipt in a heavy, leather-bound ledger. He records the hour, the minute, and the precise longitudinal coordinates of the ship at that exact moment in time, using a dip pen and dark blue ink. But the bureaucracy is not yet satisfied. The Cunard line requires 3 identical copies of every transmission. The purser slides a sheet of dark blue, waxy carbon paper between 2 fresh yellow forms. He places them in a heavy, cast-iron typewriter and meticulously retypes the passenger's 12-word message. The heavy, mechanical clacking of the typewriter keys striking the paper is a slow, methodical percussion. It is the sound of absolute administrative order. The carbon paper leaves a faint, ghostly smudge of dark pigment on the fingertips of the clerk, a physical testament to the weight of the record-keeping. The original copy is filed in the massive ledger. The second copy is placed in a small, brass pneumatic tube, which uses compressed air to shoot the document vertically through the walls of the ship, delivering it directly to the Marconi room. The operator at the desk reaches out, pulling the carbon copy from the brass tube with a quiet rustle of paper. Only when the paperwork is perfectly arranged, the carbon copy secured in a heavy brass clip, does the operator turn his attention to the polished brass telegraph key. The key itself is a beautiful, robust instrument. It is constructed of solid brass, mounted on a heavy slab of polished mahogany, and features a smooth, circular bakelite knob perfectly contoured to fit the thumb and index finger. The operator rests his hand lightly on the knob. He pauses for a fraction of a second, listening intently through the heavy headphones for a clear channel in the chaotic static of the ionosphere. And then he begins to tap. The sound that fills the small room is entirely unique. It is a sharp, rhythmic, metallic clicking. Click-clack, click-click-clack, clack-click. He does not look at the paper. His fingers move with a fluid, almost unconscious speed, translating the passenger's mundane 12-word message into bursts of pure electromagnetic energy. With every downward press of the brass key, a massive, high-voltage electrical circuit is closed. The massive vacuum tubes on the wall behind him flare with a brilliant, pulsing amber light, reacting to the thousands of volts surging through the system. The energy generated by this equipment does not simply vanish into the room. It is channeled through thick, heavily insulated cables, up through the ceiling and out to the massive copper aerial wires strung high between the ship's towering funnels. From those wires, the 12-word message, arriving Tuesday morning, stop, weather, fine, is violently hurled out into the freezing, pitch-black void of the North Atlantic. It travels at the speed of light, entirely invisible, cutting through the dense maritime fog and the crashing waves, leaping across thousands of miles of empty ocean, until it is finally caught by a towering, skeletal steel antenna perched on the edge of the American continent. It takes less than 30 seconds to transmit the 12 words. When he is finished, the operator releases the brass key with a soft click. But his job is not yet complete. He must wait, listening through the heavy static in his headphones for the faint, distant confirmation signal from the receiving station in New York. When the confirmation arrives, he reaches for a heavy rubber stamp. He presses it into a black ink pad and brings it down firmly onto the original paper form. Thud. The bright ink reads, "Transmitted." He then takes the form, along with the dark blue carbon copy, and carefully files them away in a precise, alphabetically organized mahogany cabinet. The third copy is sent back down the narrow rubber stairs to be slipped quietly under the door of the passenger's stateroom, offering silent, documentary proof that their 12 expensive words have successfully crossed the void. It is a process of immense, comforting order. The chaotic, terrifying reality of the ocean is entirely ignored in favor of word counts, carbon copies, and rubber stamps. The sheer scale of the North Atlantic is reduced to a simple, manageable administrative task. You stand in the warm, amber glow of the room, listening to the rhythmic, hypnotic clicking of the brass key as the operator moves on to the next message. It is a sound of pure, unyielding connection. It is the sound of human intention imposing order on the emptiness of the sea. Click, click, clack, buzz. The rhythm is incredibly steady. The operator is sending a long, complex manifest of cargo back to the Cunard offices in Southampton. Thousands of words, describing the exact weight of the mailbags, the quantity of the silver bullion, and the precise inventory of the French champagne stored deep in the refrigerated holds. It is a litany of extreme, mundane detail being fired into the dark. You watch the vacuum tubes pulse in time with the tapping, their deep, warm glow casting long shadows across the heavy bakelite panels. The air smells of hot glass and the faint, metallic tang of electricity. The ship continues its slow, majestic rolling beneath your feet, but the operator does not seem to notice. He is entirely focused on the perfect, measured cadence of the Morse code. You let the sound of the clicking key wash over you, feeling the deep, underlying thrum of the Parsons turbines vibrating through the floorboards. The two rhythms, the fast, sharp staccato of the telegraph and the slow, heavy heartbeat of the engines, combine to create a deeply hypnotic, mechanical symphony. The bureaucracy of the void is functioning perfectly. The ledgers are being updated. The forms are being stamped. The world outside the hull does not matter. Your mind begins to drift away from the warm glow of the vacuum tubes, leaving the operator to his quiet, endless work. You trace your imaginary steps back down the narrow rubber stairs, leaving the functional reality of the boat deck behind, and descending once more into the heavy, carpeted silence of the first-class corridors. You return to your stateroom. The frosted amber sconce is still casting its faint, honey-colored light. You sink back into the heavy, yielding comfort of the brass bed. The camel hair blanket is warm, and the Sea Island cotton sheets are cool against your skin. You close your eyes, letting the rhythmic clicking of the telegraph key fade slowly from your mind, replaced entirely by the slow, patient, unyielding groan of the ship's woodwork as it flexes against the deep. The administrative tasks of the night are complete. There is nothing left to file, nothing left to count, and nothing left to do but drift. You let the heavy, organized isolation of the floating palace lull you deeper and deeper into the quiet architecture of the night. Your imaginary journey through the sprawling, floating palace has finally come to its quiet conclusion. You have left the freezing, wet cobblestones of the Southampton pier thousands of miles behind you. You have felt the deep, mechanical awakening of the massive bronze propellers and traced the chaotic energy of the high-pressure steam as it was civilized by the heavy, oiled reduction gears. You have stood on the pristine, holy-stoned teak of the enclosed promenade, wrapped tightly in the heavy, fibrous wool of a deck chair, watching the massive steel gyroscopes stubbornly refuse to yield to the freezing swells. You have visited the warm, electrical sanctuary of the Marconi room, listening to the hypnotic, bureaucratic clicking of the telegraph key sending 12-word radiograms into the dark. But the active exploration of the ship is now over. Your mind returns fully and completely to the heavy, insulated reality of your own stateroom. The air in the cabin is perfectly still. It carries the faint, incredibly comforting scent of dried lavender, beeswax polish, and the dry, steady heat radiating from the cast iron steam pipes hidden discreetly behind the wooden panels. You lie perfectly still in the center of the massive brass bed, feeling the slow, majestic rise and fall of the hand-tied mattress beneath you. The Sea Island cotton sheets have adjusted perfectly to the temperature of your resting body, creating a seamless, yielding envelope of heavy fabric. The camel hair blanket provides a dense, grounding anchor across your chest, holding you securely against the slow, rhythmic tilting of the room. It is here, in the absolute, deepest, most unsupervised hour of the night, that we must consider the profound geographical reality of your current position. You are no longer tethered to the European continent. The damp fog and the wrought iron gas lamps of the English coast are gone. lost entirely in the churning white wake of the propellers days ago. But you have not yet reached the American coast. The towering skyline of New York, the chaotic, brilliant lights of the harbor, and the frantic pace of the modern world remain hundreds of miles ahead of the bow, hidden entirely by the curvature of the earth. You have reached the exact mathematical midpoint of the North Atlantic crossing. In the rigid, highly structured world of maritime navigation, this specific invisible line on the chart is known as the point of no return. It is the precise moment when turning the massive ship around would take exactly as much time and consume exactly as much coal as simply continuing forward. There is an immense, almost overwhelming psychological comfort in this geographical reality. For the next 48 hours, you are completely, undeniably suspended. You are the furthest you can possibly be from the demands of the terrestrial world. You cannot receive mail. You cannot be called upon for a meeting. You cannot alter the schedule or change the destination. The exhausting, chaotic responsibilities of land have been temporarily, legally abolished by the sheer, staggering distance of the open ocean. You are required only to exist. You are held safely within a 45,000-ton envelope of riveted steel, compressed Portuguese cork, and polished mahogany. You close your eyes in the dark, letting this absolute, unyielding isolation settle over you like a heavy, weighted garment. If you were to project your mind downward, past the heavy Axminster carpet, past the spinning turbines, and through the thick steel plates of the hull, you would find nothing but a freezing, lightless abyss. The ocean floor drops away to a depth of over 12,000 feet, a crushing, ancient trench of black water that has never seen the sun. If you were to project your mind upward, past the wrought iron skylights and the towering funnels, you would find the freezing vacuum of the winter sky, scattered with the cold, indifferent light of a billion stars. You are suspended perfectly between the crushing pressure of the deep and the endless void of the atmosphere. There is no land in any direction. There are no other ships. There is no possibility of an unexpected arrival. The outside world simply does not matter anymore. As you lie there, absorbing the profound comfort of this isolation, you begin to focus entirely on the physical sounds of the stateroom. Because the ship is so heavily insulated, the violent roar of the freezing wind and the crashing of the waves against the exterior hull have been reduced to a very faint, continuous, low-frequency hiss. It is a soft, white noise, completely indistinguishable from the sound of a distant, gentle rain. But beneath that hiss is the sound of the floating palace itself. The RMS Aquitania is not a rigid, unyielding block of metal. If she were constructed to be completely stiff, the immense, crushing forces of the ocean swells would shatter her iron spine in a matter of days. Instead, the brilliant naval architects designed her to be a living, flexible entity. She was engineered with massive expansion joints built directly into her superstructure. These joints allow the upper decks of the ship to slide against one another, opening and closing by fractions of an inch as the massive steel hull bends over the crest of a heavy wave. Because of this necessary, highly engineered flexibility, the interior of the ship is in a state of constant, microscopic motion. You listen closely in the dark as the massive steel bow encounters a heavy, rolling swell, lifting thousands of tons of displacement up toward the dark sky. The ship undergoes a slow, microscopic stretching. The heavy mahogany wardrobe in the corner of your room begins to groan softly. It is a deep, drawn-out creaking of polished wood against polished wood. The solid walnut writing desk responds, offering a very faint, woody sigh as its joints absorb the subtle twisting of the floorboards. The brass hinges of your heavy stateroom door click quietly, shifting slightly within their oiled casings as the bulkhead leans into a long, slow roll. It is a slow, rhythmic chorus of woodwork, brass, and steel. The ship is breathing. Every time the bow lifts into the air to meet an oncoming swell, the massive wooden skeleton of the interior stretches, inhaling the tension of the sea. The wood groans, a slow, patient sound, like a heavy wooden door opening in extreme slow motion. Then, the bow hovers for a long, suspended second at the apex of the wave. The tension is momentarily released, and the wood falls entirely silent. Finally, the bow begins its long, deliberate descent into the trough of the wave, sliding heavily down the back of the swell. The woodwork compresses, exhaling a deep, structural sigh that echoes gently through the dark, empty corridors of the first-class decks. Rise, groan, hover, silence, fall, groan, hover, silence. It is the sound of the ship accommodating the ocean, rather than fighting it. It is the sound of an immense, heavily engineered machine safely absorbing the violence of the void, so that you do not have to. This rhythmic creaking is not a sound of structural weakness. It is the sound of profound, engineered resilience. It inspires a deep, undeniable sense of trust. You let the rhythm of the creaking wood synchronize with your own breathing. You inhale slowly as the ship lifts, feeling the mattress rise gently against your back. You exhale slowly as the ship descends, feeling the heavy camel hair blanket press down slightly, anchoring you to the bed. The deep, unyielding thrum of the Parsons turbines continues its endless rotation far below the floorboards. It is a constant, mechanical heartbeat, vibrating softly through the heavy brass bedposts, a deeply reassuring pulse that promises the journey is proceeding exactly as mathematically planned. The freezing, pitch-black reality of the Atlantic Ocean is out there, pressing against the thick marine glass of your porthole. But the massive iron rivets are holding fast. The thick layers of Portuguese cork are absorbing the noise. The outside world has been entirely locked away. There is nothing left to organize. The steamer trunks have been labeled and categorized. The massive gyroscopes are spinning in the dark. The telegraph operator has finished his endless stream of 12-word messages, and the heavy, oiled reduction gears are bathing quietly in their golden waterfalls. The administrative duties of the floating palace are functioning with absolute, silent perfection. You are a passenger, completely insulated from the cold, wrapped tightly in the heavy architecture of sleep. The faint, honey-colored outline of the frosted amber sconce begins to fade entirely from your mind, leaving only the warm, velvet darkness of the room. The slow, hypnotic groaning of the mahogany panels merges with the deep, resonant vibration of the oiled gears. The ship continues its slow, majestic, unwavering journey across the black water. You sink deeper and deeper into the yielding comfort of the sea island cotton. The night is vast, the steel is strong, and you are drifting steadily deeper into the quiet, heavily insulated center of the ocean. I genuinely enjoy what I do here. exploring these yawn-worthy corners of the past with you. If you are still awake, please post your location and local time in the comments. It is our global ritual for those who watch the world through the glass of history. Until the next time we drift through the currents of the past, sleep well.